if you have a burning question while I'm talking, just feel free. And thank you all so very much for being here. I'm a occupational therapist, and I had never been psychic or spiritual or anything. I was saying to David, my dad's an Episcopal minister. I tried very hard to support religion, but religion just never really worked for me. I'd consider myself spiritual, but at the time when my brother passed, and my brother's name is also David. So David, this is sort of interesting. Both our dads are Episcopal ministers, and my brother's name is David, and you're David. So the synchronicities are quite there.
And my father was David also.
Oh my gosh, 3 Davids, mind, body, soul, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, whatever. But I love the number 3. It certainly is spiritual. My brother, David, passed in 1995, and he died of AIDS. And it was during the 1990s when, for those of you that are older, you may remember thousands and thousands of people were dying of AIDS in the 1990s. And David had come out that he was gay in his 20s. And I was quite proud of my family for supporting David throughout his journey. And a couple of years before he passed, because he passed in 1995, it was about 1992. We always go to Cape Cod for our family vacation. As a matter of fact, this Sunday, we are leaving for Cape Cod. We go camping with the whole Austill family and friends. We have 17 campsites. We have, 53 people coming, and it's a total blast. So David and I were walking on the beach, Coast Guard National Seashore, and this is in 1992. And I casually said to him, "Hey, Dave, have you been tested for AIDS?" And he turned away. And that was not what I expected. And the sun went behind the clouds, and my heart started to beat faster. And I waited for about 10 seconds for David to answer that question. And I was getting a little worried. And because at that point, when people had AIDS, everybody died. There was no solution. Still, they haven't seemed to figure it out. But at that point, everybody died. And so David was, he was 35 when he passed. So he must have been 37. He must have been in his mid-30s. And so he turned back and he said, "Becky, I'm HIV positive." And I feel like a goofball now, but I didn't know what that was. And I said, "Well, David, I don't know what that was." And he says, "It turns into AIDS." And I looked at him, and he is my, mid-30s brother who is now going to die. And I thought, "David, are you getting good medical care?" And he lived right outside of Boston. And he said, "Yes, Beck, I'm getting the best that I possibly can. And please don't tell anybody. I don't want to be treated any differently. I'm taking all the precautions. And I just want people to treat me normally." And so I said, "Okay." And I was married. I am married. And we just celebrated, my husband and I just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary. And David said, "Please don't even tell Jeff, your husband." And so I said, "Okay." So it was interesting because I ended up with no support system. And what happened was, I'm a science-based occupational therapist. Well, I certainly was. That's what I was, a science-based OT. And I ended up in the Exton, Pennsylvania Barnes & Noble bookstore in the New Age section, which I never heard of. Didn't even know what it was. But there I was, and I looked at books that seemed interesting, and they were about the afterlife. And you would think, being a preacher's kid, I thought about the afterlife. I had no idea. None. That there was even a possibility that people could live. And so I would look at the back cover of the book and see if the person seemed professional and seemed normal and not too far out. And then I would, if it was interesting to me, I would go back and find the very first book that they wrote and read everything that they wrote about. And I sent some of these books to David. So when he passed, he was sort of aware that there might be a possibility that he could still continue to live, but we didn't know anybody that lived or that talked about life after death. We didn't know anybody that did that. So I had a big business going on, and you'll sort of imagine I have a fair amount of energy. And by the time I sold the business, specifically to share this story, I sold the business. I had a staff of 350 and I had started it myself. It was occupational therapist, physical therapist, speech therapist, and we serviced over 100,000 clients. So I work a lot. And I got a call at work in, gosh, it was that last week of September of 1995. And it was my parents, and they never call me at work. And they said, Becky, David has just been taken to the hospital in an ambulance. And David had always said, if he goes to the hospital in an ambulance, he's never coming back. And I thought, oh my gosh. And so I called my assistant and said, please make me plane reservations immediately because I'm in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, so I could fly to Boston. I made the last, it was the last couple of seconds on the plane and packed my black suit, which I hope I wasn't going to wear, and got there. And I went in to see David, and he was in the hospital, and he said, he's lying there very ill. Becky, I'm so sorry to take you away from work. And I thought, oh, what a terrible thing to say. And it was such a eye-opening moment for me to realize here's my brother dying, and he's apologizing for taking me from work, which, it sort of gives us time to reflect on our priorities of life. Well, David really was passing, and a lot of people came in to say goodbye to him. And on Wednesday, we met with the physician, because this was like on Monday. Wednesday, we met with the physician, and he said, your brother is not going to last. So I went into the meditation room. I didn't know anything about meditation. I'd read by this point a couple of hundred books about the afterlife, but I'd never done anything, and I didn't even know what meditation was. But there was a room on the floor of the hospital. It said meditation room. And one of David's best friend, a childhood friend we all knew, Edward, had passed about 6 months ago. And so I went into this meditation room and I called for Edward. Never done this before. And Edward appeared. And by that point, I'd had no sleep and such. So I didn't think it was that unusual. But anyway, I saw him. And he always was very tall. He was about, easy 6'8". And he grew. I saw him. He grew and grew and grew and grew, and his head touched the ceiling. And I said, Edward, can you please take care of David? And he looked at me and he put his arms out like this, which for me was more representative of religion. And yes, I will take care of David. And I said, thank you very much. It was on a Friday. So that was on a Wednesday. On Friday, it didn't seem like David was going to live through the night. And I said to my folks, I'd really like to stay with David tonight. And by this point, he's lying flat on his back in a coma. He's in a coma. And we got permission so that I could stay with him and such. I woke up at 3:00 in the morning and I felt nothing. Now, I teach Reiki now, and I understand what energy's like. I didn't know at the time at all, but somehow I knew David was not there. And he was on I feel like a goofball. I always get him mixed up. It was either a respirator or a ventilator. You'd think I'd figure this one out. But anyway, it was that horrible sound. And it was just for him to not be in pain. And it was like, and then, just this deep, deep sound. And there didn't feel like any spirit or soul or anything was there. This 3:00 in the morning. So I thought, well, this is sort of interesting. I can either go home and say to my folks, I'm here. And they'd say, well, what happened? Is David alive? And I'd say, yes, he is, but his body's breathing, but he doesn't seem to be there. Well, that seemed ridiculous for me to say. So I walked around David's room and he had crystals. He had a clear quartz crystal. He had 2 clear quartz crystals. One was his and one was his friend Edward, who had passed. And I picked up Edward's clear quartz crystal and it tingled. And I was like, wow, that's sort of interesting. And so I didn't really think much about it, but to me, it was a sign that his friend Edward, who had passed 6 months ago, maybe was there, which I thought was nice. And so David's lying flat on his back and his one hand's extended outside the hospital bed. And so I pulled my chair up to his hand and took Edward's crystal and David's crystal. They were both clear quartz crystals, and put them in my hand. And I held David's hand in between mine. And I closed my eyes. Now, David's a Pisces, and I'm a Pisces, and my dad's a Pisces, which is fish. No, that's water. We all love to swim. We used to have the triple celebration in March where we'd celebrate 3 March birthdays. I saw an animal in the water, in the ocean. I saw an animal in the ocean, and it looked like a massively fat dolphin. I had never seen this animal before, but it was very peaceful, and it was looking right at me. Now, David loved the water, but he was a 7-year survivor at that point. When you had AIDS or when you had HIV and then turned into AIDS for 7 years, you were considered a long-term care survivor. So he'd had this for 7 years, and he wasn't able to swim the last couple of years because he had a shunt giving him pain medicine. So I'm looking at this animal and thinking, wow, sort of interesting. And I'm staring right at this massively fat porpoise-like animal and realized that it had my brother's eyes. And I looked at these eyes, these big, big brown eyes, and thought, my gosh, David is transformed into this animal. Now, I had read lots of stories about potentially people changing energy and transferring into animals or transferring into whatever. And so I was somewhat aware that this could be possible, but it really did seem to me that it had my brother's eyes. They were the same eyes. So I was looking at this animal with my brother's eyes, and it very, very, very slowly started to swim towards me. It was in the ocean, very slowly and peacefully swimming towards me. And I had lost all sense of time, but if I had to put a time limit on this, I'd say it took at least 10 minutes to come towards me. And then it came inside me. And I was filled with the most beautiful sense of peace and joy and light and love, and a realization that my brother was alive. He had transformed somehow into this animal, but he stayed with me, I'd say easily 20, 30 minutes. And my whole body was vibrating with this beautiful, energetic love. Never, ever, ever happened to me before. I didn't know any of this was possible, but it felt real. After about easily 20, 25 minutes, I could feel David starting to leave. And so he very slowly left, and I saw this big, huge, fat porpoise type animal swimming away. And then I saw another little tiny small animal, same type of animal to the right, which I immediately thought was Edward, David's best friend. And I'm like, okay. And so David's swimming away, and, I'm looking at him and actually feeling peaceful because I had just experienced the most incredible feeling of life being eternal and that my brother was alive. He had just transformed. And this porpoise-like animal turned around and looked right at me. And it was like, okay, Beck, I'm going to go do my thing and you go do your thing. And then it turned back and swam away with Edward. So I took a deep breath and opened my eyes because my eyes were closed. I had opened my eyes and thought, what just happened? And by this time, so this whole thing started about 3. By this time, it was about maybe 4:30. And it's, you're in I was in a hospital wing, and I definitely didn't know what to do with myself at this point, but I went outside. And nature's always been very healing and is very healing for all of us. So I went outside, and there was a lovely garden, big trees, and I sat by a tree and shared love with the world and really just contemplated what happened. My parents came in at 7:30 in the morning. So my dad, as being an Episcopalian minister, he said, Becky, how are you doing? And I said to Dad and Mom, so dad's pretty he was pretty avant-garde. He wasn't conservative. My mom was conservative. She was the minister's wife and tried to do everything perfectly, and she did do everything perfectly. It was wonderful. So anyway, Dad says, how are you doing? And I said, I just saw David. And they looked at me, and I explained what happened. And Dad said, Becky, people deal with death in all sorts of ways. And that's what they said. And Mom just sort of looked at me, didn't say much. And I thought, okay, at least they didn't say that I am nuts. And I felt great because I had just had this experience. But then, after this, we had to go, and David still was alive, or his body was still there. And we're a family of singers. And so a lot of people came in and sang beautiful songs for this body. And I really wasn't that involved, but I was around. And the next night, Dad went in and he said goodbye to David, and David passed that night. So we had the funeral, and there was a couple of interesting things that happened during that. But about a week later, David had been living with a girl named Lorene, and they weren't lovers, but they were very good friends. And Lorene calls me up. And she said, hey, Becky, do you have a minute? And I said, yes. How are you doing? And she said, well, I'm doing fine, but I wanted to share something that happened with me. And I'm like, okay. And she said, David and I have been living together for 5 years, so he definitely knew my schedule. And it's been hard. It's been hard going back to the house that we lived in and such. And I always wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning. And so she woke up at 7 o'clock in the morning and went to the bathroom, because that's what she always does. And so she goes into the bathroom, and this is probably about, let's see, it was a week after David had passed that she told me this. So this was probably about 3 or 4 days after he passed. She says, I go into the bathroom and I hear this knock, and I'll see if I can do it. I don't know if you can hear that, but hopefully you can. She hears this knock, and she'd never heard a knock before. And she had a dog, a Bichon dog, and it was going nuts, absolutely nuts, and going around and around and around. And so she looked in the bottom of the sink, and nothing was there. And then she looked under the claw-tooth bathtub, and nothing was there. And she opened up the closet, and nothing was there. And she kept hearing this knock. And she looks up, and she sees a skylight, because she had a skylight in her bathroom. And there was a big black, she called it a crow or a raven. So let's just say it's a raven. There was a big black raven, never come before. And it was on top of this skylight, making all sorts of noise and knocking and knocking and knocking. So she went to get a broom, and she took the broom, and she says, get away, get away. The next day, she goes into the bathroom, 7 o'clock in the morning, just like she always does, and she hears the knock again. And she had left the broom in the closet, and the dog is going wild, circles and circles and circles. And she takes a broom, and she says to the raven, get away, get away. Third day, she goes into the bathroom, and guess what she heard? The knock again. And she looked up, and there's the raven. And she said, David, I know it's you. I miss you tremendously. I'm okay, but you're scaring the dog. Please don't come back. And there's a lot of research and literature that animals are very sensitive to spirits. And so that was interesting. And I didn't really know that when Lorene called me up and shared all of that. And I thought, wow, Lorene, that's pretty interesting. So, I go back to work, and I was working for about 6 weeks. So what I had when I saw David, that was called a sheer death experience. In my world, in my mind, I was able to participate and be present when David's soul left his body and transformed into this porpoise-like animal. I didn't realize it was even called a shared death experience until later. And then I realized, oh my gosh. I was at with Elizabeth Boyson in Helping Parents Heal. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a wonderful, wonderful group for um, parents really that have lost children. Their children have passed. And Elizabeth Boyson's one of the co-founders of it. She was talking about her shared death experience. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what's called a shared death experience. About 6 weeks after this happened to me, I'm filled with grief. And you know, when people pass, our heart is closed because usually we can't let it go very easily. And so my heart's filled with grief and I'm very despondent. And I couldn't believe my 37, I guess he was 37-year-old brother had passed. It just made no sense to me at all. I think everything in life is positive. I could find nothing positive about the fact that my 37-year-old brother had passed, 1995. I used to ride a horse, and I was riding my horse down the road, and I went through into a Christmas tree farm, and it was beautiful. We had just had a first frost. David had passed on October 1st, 1995. And I've learned numbers have meanings, and 1 is new beginnings and 0 is completion. And so he passed on 10/1, October 1st, 1995. So anyway, I'm riding my horse and we enter this Christmas tree farm. My heart is closed. I'm filled with grief. I couldn't understand why on earth my brother died. So I looked at the environment and there was beautiful icicles hanging down because this is middle of November. First frost, icicles were hanging down, rainbows were sparkling, sun was shining, and I opened my heart just a little. And I said, thank you, universe. Thank you, universe, for a beautiful day. And I closed my eyes and there was my brother. And he was in human form. And he was wearing a black and red plaid flannel shirt, dungarees, and sandals. And I had never, ever done this, really read too much about this, experienced this. I was not psychic. I was not spiritual. But that was my brother. And I could see him and I started to talk with him. And I realized after like a second that I didn't have to talk. I could just share thought. And he was great. He was healthy. He had looked like he was about 30. He wasn't sick. He wasn't ill. He was just beautiful. His whole face was beaming. He was great. I was great. I'm like, all right, here's my brother. And I looked to the right and they were my grandparents and the Abe and Bessie Dole. They lived in Wellesley, Massachusetts. They were holding hands like they always did. They had passed about 10 years ago. Standing beside them was Edward. There's Edward, 6'8" Edward standing right beside my grandparents. Standing beside Edward was a childhood family friend of mine, Holly. And Holly had passed when she was in her early 20s. She was in a motor vehicle accident. She was there. And then behind them was about two dozen other people. Now, when I was a kid, I used to play the church organ, and it was Methodist church organist. And so I was a Methodist church organist for about 4 years. These 24 other people I knew were people that I had played the church organ for at their passage, at their funeral. So I got these 24 people there, Grandma and Grandpa, who were my parents, my mom's side, Edward and Holly. And I look back at David, the scene's luminescent, absolutely light-filled, filled with love. And I look back at David, and behind him was a golden arch. And it wasn't McDonald's. This was a golden arch behind David. And of all these couple of hundred books I read, many of them said, if you see a doorway, if you ever see a doorway and it feels comfortable, feel free to go through it. So I looked to David to see if he would take me through this doorway. And instead, my 4'10" grandmother, Bessie Dole, she and Grandpa were teachers in the Wellesley educational system. Grandma takes me by the hand and we skip. We actually skipped through this golden arch. And on the other side of the golden arch was fuchsia colored land. And I'm looking at you all. David Simison. It was much more brilliant than your shirt, but similar in a very brilliant fuchsia color. So my husband and I, we've been married 40 years and we have 2 boys. And as you can imagine, they've heard this story a number of times. And the kids now are in their mid to late 30s. And they say, Mom, do not say fuchsia. And I'm like, and why is that? And they said, well, it sounds like you're tripping, sounds like you're high, sounds like you're loaded. And it seriously was fuchsia. So I just thought I'd put that out there. It was a fuchsia colored land. And at that point, I heard my dad's dad, and he had passed about 15 years ago. And I didn't see him. I saw everybody else, but I didn't see Gramps for some reason. And he says in a very loving voice, get over here. And he takes me by the hand and we fly. We fly through this fuchsia colored land for what seemed like hours, reminiscing, sharing thoughts, enjoying being together. And all of a sudden, my horse starts to move. So I'm riding this horse that's starting to move. And I say, Gramps, I need to go back. And so we do this U-turn in this fuchsia colored land. And he brings me immediately right back to the golden arch, and the horse is moving. And so I fly through the golden arch. I land in front of my brother, David. I look to the right. There's Grandma and Grandpa holding hands like they always did, and Edward and Holly and 24 other people. And they're all there. And they're all smiling, and the scene's filled with love. And I say to them all at the same time, I need to go back. I need to go back. And you know what they all said? All of them. We will always be here. We will always be here. And I pull up the reins and I sat on my horse for a long time and thought, holy mackerel, what just happened to me? I had never heard anything like this, but I had just seen my brother and my grandparents and Edward and Holly and heard Gramps. And I was sure, absolutely positive sure, that life is eternal. And I thought, okay, now, so this is 1995. Okay, how am I going to learn how to communicate with my brother again? And so in 1995, we really didn't have computers, which is sort of curious to realize. So I went to the library. And I walked up and down the library corridor looking for, I'm not sure, because I didn't know what happened to me, but I thought that a book would fall out and be the book that would explain what just happened. Well, that didn't happen. So I'm like, that's sort of interesting. So I waited a moment and then went to the health food store. Like, oh, well, maybe I can find something at the health food store. And I went to the bulletin board and was looking at the bulletin board, and nothing stood out. You know, all the little cards, business cards everybody has, all that. Nothing stood out. And so I'm the type of person that most of the time makes things happen. And I rarely ask for assistance, but at this point I was out of options. And so I just very deeply and mindfully thought and probably said out loud, except I probably didn't do it out loud because I was in the store, but definitely thought, please send me a teacher. Please send me a teacher. And then I went home. A couple of weeks later, a friend of mine, and she was on my staff. She's an occupational therapist, and her name's Dr. Amy Carroll. And she teaches occupational therapy at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. Very highly esteemed program. She's fantastic. She wins awards. Well, she was working with me at the time. And she came in and she said, hey, Beck, how are you doing? And I didn't tell anybody really what had happened to me. I was running this business, and, you know, I had all these people, and I I didn't know anybody that maybe could assist me. And so I just said, well, it's really rough. I mean, my husband knew and my parents knew a little bit, but that was pretty much all. So Amy says to me, Becky, I met somebody that I think you'd like. And I'm like, who is that? And she said, well, her name is Nancy Ariel, and she lives in Reading, Pennsylvania. Now, I don't know if y'all know where Reading, Pennsylvania is, but it's definitely a blue collar city in Pennsylvania. And I'm like, she lives in Reading, Pennsylvania? She goes, yes, she's a shaman. And I wasn't even sure what a shaman was. And so I said, well, what's a shaman? And Amy says, well, Becky, I'm not really sure, but I think that they believe that everything natural has energy. And she lives in Reading. And I'm like, wow, because Reading was about maybe an hour, maybe 50 minutes away from where I lived. And I'm like, no kidding. And she goes, and she talks to people that have passed on. I'm like, really? So she gave me her number. I call her up, and I expected, like, I thought if there was a shaman, they would live in Peru or Brazil or something. But for me to call a shaman, apparently a shaman that lived in Reading, Pennsylvania, it just seemed so curious to me. But anyway, I call her up, and I expected to have some quiet, peaceful person, and she's very vibrant. And I said, hi, Nancy. This is Becky Austill-Clausen, and Amy Carroll referred me to you, and she was filled with energy. And I'm like, all right. And I asked her for an appointment. And so we set an appointment, and I often work 100-hour weeks. And so we set an appointment for Wednesday. And that Wednesday, I got up like at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning so that I could get all my work done and then go see Nancy. And we had this huge snowstorm, sort of like the rainstorm that we're having tonight, except it was snow. And so we had this massive snowstorm. And if it wasn't that I was traveling to see this shaman that hopefully was going to teach me how to talk to David, I would have canceled because it was ridiculous to be driving in this. But being from Boston, we always used to drive in the snow. So I'm pretty careful driving, and I'm driving the 50 minutes to see Nancy and nervous, and my hands are on the steering wheel, and I'm hoping I'm not going to, get off the road and all of that. And all of a sudden I feel this tremendous feeling of peace, and all my nerves went away. And I immediately found Nancy's home and got out of the car and sunk into snow that seriously was like, it was easily maybe at least 8 or 9 inches deep. And I'm in my down coat, down hat, down gloves, like pants that had 3 different layers, boots, the whole thing. So I go up to Nancy's door, knock on the door, and this woman in a house dress, like a not house dress, sundress, a sleeveless sundress, opens the door, and I look at her and I thought, oh my gosh. And at that point I made a decision. Do I feel comfortable coming in here? And I sort of looked around, and she had nice plants and all of this, and the vibe felt right. And so I went in and ended up apprenticing with Nancy Ariel for 3 to 6 hours a week for 1 year. And she taught me lots and lots and lots and lots of things. And one of the first things she taught me is how to continue to communicate with my brother. And that very first session that I had with Nancy, I'll never forget it. She did Reiki. She's a Reiki master, and she had me lying on her massage table, and she had a beautiful, beautiful room. And she had all sorts of crystals around and such. And so I'm lying on my massage table, and my eyes are closed, and she's doing her energy work. And she says, Becky, there's all sorts of angels around you. And I'm like, really? And I wanted to open my eyes, but I didn't want the angels to go away. So I just believed Nancy. And there's sort of a funny little thing. I used to always have very smelly feet, like they were terrible. And I thought, let me just ask Nancy if she can do something. And I said, Nancy, my feet are really very, very smelly. If you can do something, that'd be great. Well, honest to Pete, I don't know what she did, but she held on to the soles of my feet, and whatever she did, my feet have not smelled since that date. I'm like, all right. So, so she goes, Becky, we're going to go on a journey. I'm like, okay, that sounds great. I had never done this before. And she says, we're going to travel above the earth, and you're going to sit on the back of a bird. Like, okay, great. And she says, you're not going to hurt the bird. And so I want you to keep your eyes closed. And she put on beautiful music. I think it was Pachelbel, actually, but she put on this beautiful soft music, no words, just beautiful sounds. And she says, I want you to keep your eyes closed and visualize the bird that's going to come and take you to another realm. And so I thought maybe I'd get a hummingbird or a bluebird or a robin. And so I'm looking at this, I'm just sort of imagining this bird coming, and this big black bird comes, big black bird. And it took me years to realize that this was the same bird, same raven concept that Lorene, David's partner, had visiting him. But anyway, this big black bird comes, and Nancy says, say hello. And I did say hello. And she says, now I want you to climb on its back, and it's not going to hurt the bird at all. And so I climbed on its back, and she says, now hold on. And, being a horseback rider, I knew how to hold on with my legs, and I was holding on with my hands and such. And we started to ascend, and it was absolutely spectacular. We went higher and higher and higher and through the clouds. And then there was this long tunnel, which for those of you, in Ions, tunnels are very common. There's a long tunnel, and we go through this tunnel, and there was a period of darkness. And for a second, I got a little nervous, but it was fine. And then I get out of the tunnel filled with this huge white light, humongous white light. And at the end of the tunnel with all this white light, it was either 6 or 7 tall beings, spirit beings. They looked in human form to me. I couldn't see their face, and they would look like monks. Actually, they had a like a, I forget what you call it, but it was like a shawl that goes from the top of your head to your floor. A vestment. It was like a vestment. So I couldn't see their face, but they had this vestment covering their head. And I was looking at these monks that looked like monks, and one stepped forward. And I realized, at least for me, that this was God. This was God. Now, I'd been an atheist and an agnostic for a long time. I thought the concept was interesting, but I had no idea how someone could talk about God and believe in God. And I just couldn't figure it out. But for me, this was God. And so I knelt down and bowed my head, and God said, rise. And I thought, oh, I don't know if I can rise. And Nancy, when I was doing this, what I was on was what's called a shamanic journey. And I was talking to her while I was doing this. And so she was part of it. And she says, Becky, ask a question. And I'm like, ask a question? Who am I to ask a question of God? And she goes, ask a question. And so my question was, I rose and I said, if I get into this, that's what I called it. If I get into this, will my work, I always put work first, would my work, my kids, and what was the other one? I think it was my husband. Would my work, my kids, my husband be all right? And the answer was yes. Yes, they will. And then Nancy said, ask for a sign. Ask for a sign of spirituality. If you see a sign that happens to be what you've just heard about, then you'll know that this is a spiritual message. And so I said, is there a sign that I can acknowledge to realize when you're present? And the sign was a feather. And so now every time I see a feather, I pause and I think, oh my, thank you. I always, always, always express gratitude. You know, gratitude and love fit hand in hand. And usually there's something wonderful when I see this feather that's happening, or it causes me to look at something wonderful. So I've met God, received a feather sign, and Nancy says, all right, get back on your bird and we're going to come back. And so I get back on the bird and we fly down. We didn't go through any more tunnels or anything. We fly down and the bird brings me back to where I started. And Nancy says, now you can get off the bird and give your thanks. And I said, thank you, just thank you so much. And I got off the bird and gave my thanks, and the bird went away. And after a few moments, I opened my eyes, and Nancy and I talked a lot about what happened. So what did happen after that was I realized years and years and years later, I realized that this bird was the same bird, or the same type of bird that was with Lorene. And so Raven for me is a sign that my brother's around, that the afterlife is here. And if you look up Raven, there's a wonderful book. Maybe you're familiar with it. It's Teddy Andrews. Teddy Andrews wrote the book Animals Speak. And it's a magnificent Native American encyclopedia of animal signs. And so it's called Animals Speak by Teddy Andrews. And so if you look up Raven, it definitely is a spiritual type of animal and reflection. And the way Nancy told me to use Animal Speak is she said, if you ever find an animal that you're interested in, you want to know the spiritual aspects, there's a couple of hundred animals in this, and there's always a heading, and there's like 3 words that give the meaning of the animal, and then there's all the physical description and all of that, and then you go to the last paragraph of the particular animal, and that has a spiritual significance. I love this book, Animal Speak, and I have about 4 copies, one in my car, one in my office, one in the RV. Like, I have these books, and they're good. So it's been very interesting to explore different animals, different signs, different symbols. My brother to this day continues to come back, which is incredible. Like, he's been gone over 30 years, and I talk with him frequently, and there's all sorts of things I can share. I learned what's called automatic writing, and how you can communicate with spirits automatically. And I was writing, and I got so much information that Lot, L-O-T, who was my first spirit guide that came to me in an automatic writing sense. He says, Becky, why don't you, calls me Rebecca, R-E-B-E-K-A-H, Rebecca, why don't you use a typewriter? Which I thought was so curious, because for me, I'm dealing with these ancient beings, and for me to use, I'm not a typewriter. He says, why don't you use a computer? And I'm like, how could I use a computer with these ancient beings? But I type fast. And so I was able to get lots of information. But I learned so much that first year with Nancy. And so anyway, I had a wonderful time with Nancy. We did shamanic journeying. I became certified in Reiki, automatic writing, learned all about crystals. I mean, it was learned past life regression. Like, it was a blast. So I'd spend like 3 to 6 hours a week with her. Meanwhile, I'm running the business, and we have 2 little kids. The kids are, by this point, they were like 6 and 8 years old. And for the next 20 years, I explored all sorts of complementary modalities, integrative health, anything I can find about all of this, until I reached the age of 60. And by that point, the business had grown to 350 staff, and we serviced 100,000 clients. And I said to my CFO, Chief Financial Officer, Bob, my soul is crying out for me to share what happened with me. And he said, we'd worked together for, over 20 years. He says, Becky, I'd be glad to stay here even if you're not here. And I looked at him and I said, you mean you'd be interested in buying the business? And I had talked about selling it a couple of times, and he and I had worked side by side for 20 years. So we both knew the price. And you know what he said? It was so wonderful, because when you start something from scratch and you grow it and it works and all that, he said, Becky, I'd be glad to stay here only if you think I can do it. And I'm like, of course you can do it. And so he became president, I became CEO, and I got this book that I had attempted to write professionally edited. And the business was sold December 31st, 2015. My book, Changemaker, How My Brother's Death Woke Up My Life, was published by She Writes Press, which is a hybrid publisher, which means you have a ability to you pay to play essentially, but they're a professional organization, fantastic. And the book got published on September 13th, 2016. And I left in the book that I was an occupational therapist, and I'm very involved with the American OT Association. And I thought I'd get kicked out. I seriously thought I'd get kicked out of the profession, and nothing happened. I'm like, wow, it's sort of interesting. And the next year, it was, so it was 2016, it was March of 2017. The book had been out, was doing well. And my husband and I just finished 2 weeks ago visiting all the US national parks. So we're in Olympic National Park in the state of Washington, in the whole rainforest. We have a rainforest in the United States. So we're in the whole rainforest, and I'm looking at my phone, and it says, congratulations, your book, Changemaker, has just won 3 National Book Awards. Can you please come to the Book Expo of America and pick them up? And I'm like, all right. And it wasn't an ego trip. It was like after death communication is hitting the mainstream. And it subsequently has won 2 more awards. And it's been such a blast to talk with you all and to talk with anybody that wants to hear about the fact that love is the common denominator between this world and the afterlife, that we live forever, that we all can communicate with our loved ones. We all can experience life eternal. And at that point, I started going to IONS, and I knew about IONS, but it was always during this family vacation. And so I never went. But after a couple of years, I thought, I need to go to IONS. It's a good place to market the book. And so I said, okay, I'm going to miss the family vacation, but I'm going to go to IONS this year. I decided that one night. The next morning, the very first email was from IONS, very first. It said, submit a proposal to speak. I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I submitted a proposal to talk about after-death communication, got accepted, went there, met all the main players, Bruce Grayson, like these whole huge people. I'm like, oh my gosh, it was fantastic. That last day of the IONS conference, it was in Seattle, Washington at that point, 2018. They said, next year, the conference is going to be in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, 20 minutes from my house. I'm like, all right. And so, at that point, Diane Corcoran, who's president emeritus, who has since passed, and Delane Deal, they both came to help market the conference in the fall. And they said, so Becky, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I've only been to one conference. They said, no, it's okay. And they gave me a variety of options. And I said, well, how about if I work on healing? And so that's what happened. And so I've been the IONS Healing Coordinator since 2019. And if anybody's going to conferences here, please come to the Healing Welcome Center. We've got over 600 healing sessions that are being provided, 20 minutes, one-on-one, either energy healing or talk healing. And they're done in a group setting. And it's absolutely fantastic. I interview every single healing practitioner. We've got 36 healing practitioners. And you know who's coming? Melvin Morse, Dr. Melvin Morse, who wrote Children, oh God, I'm blanking on it. Children of Light. And that's the NDE stories about kids. This is Dr. Melvin Morse. He says he wants to be a healer, and he does a lot of the work with Raymond Moody, who coined the term, physician Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience. And so to have Melvin Moore say he wants to be a healer, I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I called him up and we talked, and I said, well, what were you thinking of doing? And he said, I'm a Reiki master. Like, no kidding. And so he's doing Reiki and a Japanese light transmission activity. We've got tons of mediums and psychics and spiritual counseling and ancestral healing. And it costs $20, and it's a fundraiser for IONS. And so if you're coming, Hopefully it's going to be open the day before, but it's every day from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And so at this point, I would like to say, I hope to see you at Ions. If you're not coming in person, it's in Chicago. It's August 27th, pre-conference workshops. I taught Reiki there for 4 years, and the healing center grew so big this year. I said, I can't teach it, but another occupational therapist is teaching Reiki level 1 pre-conference workshops and other excellent pre-conference workshops on August 27th. And then the conference is August 28th to August 31st, Thursday through Sunday. It's the golden anniversary. This is the 50 years of near-death experiences is this year. And guess who's going to be one of the speakers? Dr. Raymond Moody in person is coming, and he's the psychiatrist that coined the term near-death experience. And of course, Melvin Morse is speaking, and he'll be a healing practitioner. So I encourage you to hopefully come in person. It's online. If you can't come in person, check it out online. The website is conference.ions, IANDS.org, conference.ions.org. You get the whole schedule, the whole thing, sign up. It'd be a total blast to see you either in person or know that you're online. So at this point, let me stop talking. I'm available to answer anything you want. And thank you so very much for letting me share my sheer death experience. And then when I learned how to communicate with David, my brother David, on the horse, that was the spiritual transformative experience. So thank you very, very much for letting me share that.
Ah, very good. Thank you, Becky. That was great.
Oh, thanks, David. Love your name, David.
There you go. I have a few questions, but let me open it up to the others. Who wants to jump in? Give them a few seconds and then I'm jumping in.
You don't all have to talk at once.
That's right. All right, I've got one. So when you're on the horse, take me through that again. You closed your eyes and then
Yes.
had this elaborate experience.
Yes.
I'm curious. So your eyes are shut and you're having almost what sounds like a near-death experience, going through the tunnel, going into the land of light, and
Yes.
feeling this incredible love. Near-death experiences, describe it as realer than here. And at the same time, regression experiences are more like it felt sort of like this was happening, as opposed to it's much more real than here. How would you describe your experience, this experience on the other side that wasn't actually a near-death experience?
Good question. So that's a really good question. What I had is called a spiritual transformative experience, an STE, which Dr. Bruce Grayson, who used to be the chair, I think now he's chairman emeritus of the
Right.
Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
He is a preeminent researcher, probably the most well-known researcher out there. And he has done a huge correlation between near-death experiences and STEs, spiritual transformative experiences. And the similarities as far as the after effects are almost identical. And so it's really been very interesting to realize that I didn't have to die, but I could have the same after effects by having a spiritual transformative experience. And some of the after effects are that you are filled with love. You realize that we live eternal. We live for eternity. You're not afraid to die. And money is just a object for this realm. It doesn't come with us after this. It's just for this realm. And people become quite charitable. And all of those are consistent with the NDE Grayson scale.
Mm-hmm.
And so the after effects of a spiritual transformative experience and an MDE are very, very similar. When you have a past life regression, or you do that, I've done that multiple times, and to me, it's a very similar realm that I go into, but it's I don't necessarily feel the light as vibrant as I do during the STE, but it's still there. It's another, for me, it's another realm of consciousness that I'm going in. And a lot of people travel in the past through what's called ancestral healing. And we have a number of ancestral healers that are healing this year at the IONS conference, because there's a whole philosophy that we inherit our personalities, we inherit our images, we inherit from our ancestors any type of possible life traumas, and they keep coming and keep coming and coming. And we, each one of us, if we do live eternal, the philosophy, which I do believe, the philosophy is that we decide to come onto earth at this time. And we do that to help heal. And with all the trauma that's going on these days, it's very nice to know that all of us are here to help heal and share love. And so during a past life regression, if you're going through something that is traumatic, it could either be passed on through an ancestor, or it could be something that you need to resolve. And that's what happens with hopefully during a past life regression, is that you resolve it. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, Jay's got his hand held just to finish that question. So what you experienced was perhaps not realer than here, but you did see all these things. I mean, it was there, similar to a regression, uh, but unmistakable to you that you were experiencing that.
Absolutely. And I'm filled with love and with light and with an awareness that, as you
Right.
said, this is realer than real.
Okay.
It was, I'd never, ever done anything like that, ever.
Mm.
Yet it felt magnificent. And I don't discount it at all.
Okay, great. Jay, you have a question.
Hey, yeah, thanks um for having this presentation. I guess my questions takes a little bit of courage here to ask, but I guess under your opinion, I had a spiritual experience that was essentially, it felt like I actually went to hell myself. And I experienced some very traumatizing and horrifying experiences there. I don't want to go too much into detail because it's still something that I'm working through because of how traumatic it was. But I guess my question is, um, what are your thoughts on that? Do you believe that there is such thing as a hell, or was that like an experience that maybe was something that was, because as I reflect back, I do think it was a teaching moment for me, but having the sensation or feelings of being tortured for thousands of years, for things was very traumatizing. And I guess, as a healer yourself, what steps can I take to kind of heal myself from that experience and learn from that? Because I was thinking, hypnosis or, Reiki, and I'm just curious also on your opinion on how one can heal and kind of learn and overcome from a very negative experience and on the opposite side.
Thank you. First of all, Jay, thank you very, very much for sharing that. It took a lot of courage for you to share that, and I very much appreciate it. 80% of the near-death experiences are positive. 20% are not positive. And you had what's called it sounds like you had what's called a distressing NDE. And there's a whole series of support groups within the IONS organization for those that have had a distressing NDE. And the person that's leading it, to my recollection, the person that's leading it this year at the IONS conference is named Daniel Endy, E-N-D-Y. And he's been involved with IONS for years, and he's been on the board, and he is very involved with tech, and he's very involved with the conference. And I'm 99% sure that he's leading the distressing NDE session this year. But anyway, if you look him up, ENDY, you can also get him and get the distressing NDE IONS group. I think if you just Google it, distressing NDEs, and maybe put Daniel NDENDY, and I think you'll get them. If for some reason you don't get them, email me, or my email's my name, well, I'm sorry, it's a long name, but it's Becky at Austill-Clausen.com, no hyphen or anything. And I'll send you the direct link. But it's a distressing NDE is oftentimes a signal that there's things that we can do to help ourselves. And again, I commend you for bringing this up. It could be that if you had some type of ancestral healing, because you could be bringing forward some tragedy from your past. So you could be bringing that forward, that during an ancestral healing event or activity or session, that might be able to get resolved. A lot of times, the distressing NDEs are seen during what we call a life review. And a lot of times when we have a life review, it goes through everything that happens in our life, whether it's good or bad. And it's a wake-up call for us to say, oh, I really could do this a little bit differently, or maybe I need to change or whatever. There are definitely things that can help you, Jay. And there's a online group called ISGO, ISGO. Stands for Ions Sharing Groups Online. And if you go onto the Ions website, and if you haven't been on the Ions website lately, it's brand new. It's great. And so if you go onto the Ions website, and I think if you just search ISGO, ISGO, or Ions Sharing Groups Online, you'll get into this online group. And there are distressing NDEs meetings that you can share and learn and talk and figure out and see why this has happened. And so those are some things that I think can help. As far as, is there a help? I've read, gosh, I don't know, maybe 1,000 books by now. I am just a prolific reader about this. And so this is my opinion. And I encourage you, when you listen to people, see what resonates with you. Just because I believe it, it doesn't mean that you need to believe it. See what seems right to you. But with that being said, what I think is that when we pass, we're filled with love, hopefully, if we can allow that love to come in. But if for some reason we haven't been able to, or like people that are very bad, like rapists and people that kill for, their own pleasure or whatever, you would think that that type of person would go to hell. I don't think there is a hell. Personally, I don't think there is a hell. What I think happens, and this is, a lot of people believe this, but it doesn't mean you have to believe this. What I think happens is that we die, and then we stay at a level that we cannot get out of that level until we realize that we need to forgive ourselves. So here are these horrible people. They need to recognize what they've done to themselves and what they've done to others. And once they learn how to forgive, then they can advance and continue to grow and continue to learn. But to me, their hell is just staying at that exact same level until they can take responsibility for what they've done. There's all sorts of spirits or angels or guides or whatever you want to call it that are here to assist people when they pass. And one of the most profound books I've ever read is called Testimony of Light. I forget who it's by, but it's Testimony of Light. And it's a nun that passed, and she has quite a communication with a friend of hers who I think is also a nun. And it's very interesting reading her words that have been transposed into the English language. And that might be an interesting book for you. It doesn't really talk about near-death. It doesn't talk about distressing near-death experiences, but it does talk about different layers of consciousness and conscious reality and all of that. So that's sort of a long-winded explanation. Instead of doing hypnosis, I mean, if you want to do hypnosis, go for it. I would encourage you, if you do hypnosis, to have someone that's familiar with near-death experiences. There's the main woman who is very, very good about near-death experiences, named Nancy Bush, Bush. And she used to, I'm pretty sure she was past president of IONS, and she had a distressing NDE, and she's written lots and lots of information on distressing NDEs. And so I encourage you to check out her work, the ISGO, ISGO, distressing NDE group, and see what see what you think about that, and then maybe consider having ancestral healing, ideally with someone that is familiar with NDEs. So I hope that helps. And it is not a reflection on you, Jay. It's not saying that you're wrong or you're bad or you're anything. It's just a way for you to continue to evolve. And somehow it seemed that this activity that you had hopefully will help you continue to evolve. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you so much. You filled me honestly with a lot of gratitude and hopefulness, because I was feeling very terrified and afraid, of the afterlife. So thank you so much, and I'll be checking out those resources. Seriously, thank you.
Good, you're welcome. It's
Yeah.
interesting. You are the second person today that has talked to me about distressing NDEs. So there is quite a bit of resources out there for healing. And thank you again for having the courage to share. You're totally awesome. And you've got my email, or hopefully you will, Becky@RebeccaAustill-Clausen.com. And feel free to keep me in touch.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Becky. David Sinison.
Yeah, so I was wondering what you talk to your brother about these days.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting. Thanks. A lot of times I don't really have conversations. It's more just a feeling. But probably one of the coolest things that ever happened to me is after a couple of years with David, died or passed, and I was continue to communicate with him and all that. So a lot of times, David, he just comes, and a lot of times he'll come as a bird, or I can just feel his energy. I teach Reiki, and so when you do Reiki or other healing modalities, you can learn how to feel energy within yourself and others. So it was just a couple of years after he passed, and we were going to Cape Cod, so it was right about this same time. We've been going there for 68 years, and this is our 68th year of going to Cape Cod. So anyway, David comes while we're driving in the car, and we're pulling our trailer, and he said I heard him. So I heard him say, "Becky, I would like to come to camping with you." And I'm like, "Okay." And he says, "But I don't want to overwhelm you. If I get too much, just tell me I'm too much." And I'm like, no, that's fine. And so it was really pretty interesting, David, and my brother's name is David, so it's interesting with these Davids here. I could feel him. He was right there throughout the first 24, 36 hours we were camping. And we set up our site, and David said, "Becky, I'd like to go swimming. I haven't been swimming." And what he really meant is that I hadn't been swimming in a physical body for years, because I had seen him swimming with this dolphin-like animal. But he said, "I'd like to go swimming." And I'm like, "Okay." And he says, "I'd like to go to my special place." And I didn't know where it was. And I said, "Well, David, I don't know where that is." And he says, I'll take you." And I'm like, "Okay." And so I just listened. And he said, "Go down this trail and this trail and this trail." And all of a sudden, there we were at this beautiful lake. And I'm like, "Wow, I never came down this way before." And it was so magical. It was an otherworldly experience. I had my bathing suit on, and I took off the wrap that I had, because I always get cold. So I took off my wrap and I had the bathing suit. I stepped in the water, and I could feel David's joy and excitement that we were actually going to go swimming. And he was a good swimmer. And so I walked out to about maybe my knees, and then I dove into the water, and the explosion of joy and love and cheer and happiness went all through my body. I had never ever felt that before. And so I came up and did it again, dove again, and did it again. it was unbelievable. And so that was a profound experience. They're not all that profound, but a lot of times I'll just be, be in the car and I'll see a license plate that says David, or I'll see something that reminds me of him, and I'll just say, thank you, because our loved ones do hear that. They do hear that. They hear the gratitude. They hear the love. And so a lot of times I teach I just retired, but I teach after death communication. And I teach it so that anybody can do it. And a lot of it is belief. Let's believe that the birds that remind us of our animals are real reminders, or let's believe that, when you hear somebody in your head that reminds you of your loved one, it really is them. And so we say, thank you. And they receive that, and it continues, and it gives them permission to come, because we have free will on this earth. Like our spirits and our loved ones oftentimes do not come unless we give them permission. And so you want to make sure people are aware that you want to hear from them. And so hopefully that gives you an idea.
Huh. Other hands up. Following up on that question, did he ever share what he's doing on the other side? Like through automatic writing or anything with you?
Oh yeah. Let's see. Yeah. I've got 4,000 pages of automatic writing, either with my brother or Lot or guides or whatever. Let's see, what would be a good little story? When people, once you learn how to communicate with beings from the other side, it really does open you up to a wonderful avenue. A friend of mine passed, and he was an architect, and so he passed, and let's see, I'll say his name is Joe. And so when Joe passed, I type it out, because it's, for me, that's works. And so I type it out and I said, hi, Joe, how is it where you are? I ask, how is it where you are? And he says, oh, they all call me Rebecca. Well, Rebecca. I guess he called me Rebecca too. Yeah, he did. They all call me Rebecca over there. Anyway, Rebecca, the light is so brilliant. It's like being in a whole hologram. Like, no kidding. He says and so I'm writing this. Oh, wow. He goes, it's like being in a hologram. The light is refracted. Now, I didn't know what that word was. So I type it, refracted, refracted. The light is refracted. And I said, hey, Joe, I teach. How can I teach this? I want to teach this so that people can recognize the light. And he said, get a prism. Have people get a prism that has all those different like cutouts on it. So it's a prism that has all these different components, not just, a four-sided prism. Get one that has like dozens of sides if you can, and have your people in the class hold it up to the light, and the light that you see is what I am in. I'm like, oh, wow. So I finished with this whole thing, and I go and look up in the dictionary refracted, and it was actually a word. I'm like, oh, wow, this real word. And it means a reflection. That's what it meant. It means a reflection. The light that he sees, or how's it go? The light that he sees is like a reflection of a prismatic light. And that's what we can see. That's how we know what the light is. And so, yeah, you can ask. The Conversations with God, which is by Neale Donald Walsch, that was started to be published in the early 1990s. That's very similar to the automatic writing that I do. And Neale Donald Walsch, he's written like about 30 books, and it's about talking with the afterlife, and he has lots of different programs that he provides and such, but it's the first one's called Conversations with God, and then they go on and on and on and on, but it's very similar to that. When my dad passed, I'm like, hey Dad, how is it over there? And he says, well, they call you Rebecca. I'm like, I do know that. And I was very interested in what he would call me. He says, so Becky. And so then he went on and told me what he was experiencing. And it was really fun. When Uncle Alan passed, I said to him, so Uncle Alan, how is it over there? And he shared, you know, what he thought. And I said, have you seen Dad? Because they were brothers. He says, well, you're Steve, we call him Steve. Steve is at a different level than I am, because I think there are all these different levels of integration. You know, you just get deeper and deeper and deeper, so that ideally what's happened is that you connect with all. Like that's what the ultimate is. We're all connected. We can connect with all. And it's so fun these days, because that's how I feel. I feel connected with all when I'm not like working. When I actually go outside and I'm hanging around some trees and I'm just relaxing and letting myself be, you know, to feel connected with all is so special. So Uncle Alan, he's like, well, yeah, he says, Steve's at a different level. But yeah, I see him occasionally. It's so fascinating to be able to do that and to have these communications with people that have passed, and some that I know and some that I don't know. And then they'll ask me to share it with their loved ones. And that's always interesting. And yeah, I've never been turned down when I've shared it with, you know, a palpitating heart. I just want to let you know I have a message from your loved one. And it's, you know, you want to be careful, but it's quite a love filled time when you're able to share that, hey, I just talked with your loved one and they asked me to share this and this and this with you, and then the person validates it. The person that you're sharing this with, when your heart's beating, hopefully they don't think I've lost my mind, they'll validate it. And it's so wonderful to have them realize, yes, you too can communicate with your loved ones. It really is real.
Other questions, so I don't dominate the questioning. I'm curious about animal spirits. You mentioned that you feel like spirit on the other side can influence actual physical animals on this side to communicate with us. Because we often hear of angels or people we encounter that probably weren't really there. That person in the hospital who was holding the hand, and then the rest of the staff says, no, there was nobody in here doing that. Or the people that are encountered, like Nancy Rhines, the woman who helped her after a car accident, feel like clear cases of instant incarnations of angels or some spirit being to help us. With these animals, because I had a friend who kept encountering bald eagles that the medium said was my father. And it just happened over and over, and the stories were pretty amazing. Is that spirit influencing an actual eagle that goes back to what he wanted to do before he got corrupted by the spirit who took him over? Or what's your take on that?
Well, I don't think there's any corruption, but I do believe that people on the other side that have passed will oftentimes assume the soul of an animal in order to help us communicate with them, meaning to help us communicate with that animal that reminds you of your dad, whether it's a bald eagle or whatever. They'll assume the presence of that animal. And so they'll come to you and they'll like be there, or you'll see them all the time, or you'll they'll come right up to you and look at you. And it's like a non-animal type of behavior, but it's a way that our loved ones on the other side use to communicate with us. They don't have to become an animal, but a lot of them become an animal. And I have to say, I was almost a little distracted while you were asking me that question, because Susan Hebbard is here. And Susan is the person in charge of the Boston Ions group, and she is fantastic. And if you ever have any desire to go to more things, I encourage you to check out Susan's Boston Ions group. And Susan, I was so honored. Susan was a healing practitioner with us when we were in, I think, Arlington, Virginia. So hi, Susan. It's great to have you here. But yeah, David, it's really very interesting to to acknowledge, to allow yourself to acknowledge that bald eagle. Thank you, Dad. And even if it's not your dad, it makes us feel good.
Mhm.
Thank you. But I believe it was and is your dad.
All right, Julie.
I've had people that I knew they were going to pass, and I'll say to them, give me a type of creature or bird or insect or something that when it shows up, I'll know it's you saying hi. And sure enough, they do, and I know for sure it's them because of all the weird things that happen. And so it's like, why not just ask them? And my last friend, a few years ago, I kept saying, Linda, tell me. And she was on her deathbed. And she said, I forgot, I can't, you name something. And I said, how about a dragonfly? She said, yes, that'd be perfect. And then she died 2 hours later. And then later in the week, this dragonfly came and just kept hanging around me. And I took some photos. And anyway, I made a print of it and gave it to the Arts Council where she used to be a part of. And so when I went to pick up the picture again, because her daughter wanted it, a friend of mine and I picked the picture up. We're holding it in the car. We made a stop somewhere. When we got back in the car, this dragonfly it was right on the windshield, like it wouldn't leave. We weren't driving yet, and it wouldn't leave.
Wow.
And I emailed her 2 daughters and told them what happened. Well, then the one daughter emails back and says, Julie, I just read your email, and then I remembered that I left something in my car because she was at work. So she went out to her car and a dragonfly landed on.
Oh,
Mhm.
So all that just because I said, Linda, let's agree on, a creature,
Mhm.
and it works.
isn't that amazing? That is a beautiful story.
Great one.
Way to go. I've had some people say, well, I asked for, we agreed on this sign and it never really happened. So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I always encourage people to ask.
Mhm.
To ask, even when not necessarily while they're here on earth, but it just go someplace where you're very connected with yourself, ideally outside in nature. I find very healing and very connective. And so just go and connect with yourself. And then if you're trying to communicate with who, your brother, your mother, your sister, whoever it is, your friend, please send me a sign. Please send me a sign, and then just be alert, particularly the next couple of days, and see if you get something. And if it really reminds you of them, believe it and just say, hey, thanks. Thank you so much.
And it works the same when I'll say to someone, hey, I haven't seen you for a while. Can you visit me in a dream? Not always, but every once in a while, that person will have a visit. So, I mean, we have to ask, I guess. Right?
Yes, because we have free will and they're not going to interfere unless we want it.
Mm.
Ah, okay.
And 80% of after-death communication occurs in dreams, 80%. And so if people have had dreams with loved ones in them, that's it. Like, that's it.
Yeah. Cool. Thank
Well,
you.
Sure, it's fun.
I know David Sobers has a question. I don't even have to wait for him to raise his hand.
Becky, any comment on the current world and state of affairs and guidance you get from the other side with those that you communicate with? Because things are pretty troubling at this moment.
Oh, they certainly are.
Oh,
Actually, yes, I do have a few things. I was thinking if I have this handy. All right, I got to write myself a note here on this. I believe every single one of us are light workers. We're all here to help share light and love. We chose to come here during this horrendous time because we think we can make a difference. Dr. Melvin Morse, M-O-R-S-E, just wrote a book with the Robert Bigelow Foundation, or called
wow.
Robert Bigelow consciousness studies of Robert
Yeah.
Bigelow consciousness studies. So anyway, the Bigelow Awards happened in 2021. Robert Bigelow, pretty cool guy, said he would give $1 million to anyone that can prove that the afterlife is real. And he had thousands of submissions. And so we formed I think it was a 6-person task force, very esteemed medical scientific folks. And they culled through these thousands of emails, and they asked, I believe, 220 people to submit an essay justifying why they believe in it, the afterlife is real. And you can get all of them for free. What happened was in November of 2021, Robert Bigelow, who was not on this committee, this was an impartial committee, awarded $1.8 million to 29 prize-winning essayists. And so if you want to get these essays, which are fantastic, you search, search Bigelow prize-winning essays. Bigelow prize-winning essays. I'm pretty sure you're going to get it. Bigelow prize-winning essays, or Bigelow, Bigelow, Bigelow essay contest. And you'll come to a website where it has the top 3 prize-winning people and their essays, and then it has some more. And a lot of them are people that are in the NDE world. It's really quite exciting. And so that's sort of one avenue. That didn't really answer your question, but I sort of got off on that. As far as, okay, so from that, I was wondering why I got off on that. So from that, Dr. Melvin Morse wrote this book. Damn, I should have, what is it? I don't seem to have it right here. If you go into Amazon and you put books by Melvin Morse, I think it's the latest one. He did it in collaboration with the Bigelow Institute. And what they did is they did this whole like random number generation with mediums to, and he asked the question, what can we do with the state of affairs of the world? Why is the world like this? How can it be resolved? And these mediums, without really knowing what the questions were, they were given numbers. I think this is right. I haven't finished the book yet, but it's something like this. All the mediums said, humanity caused this. So humanity caused it, but we can get out of it. And it'd be interesting to read this book. Melvin was going to give this book for free. And there is something to say for having to pay a little bit for a book. So I think it's like $10. So you can get it $10 on Amazon, and it's good. And
right.
that, I think, is going to help your question as far as what can we do as a society to help this horrendous situation that we're in. And I do believe, to go back to my very initial statement on this, that we are all here to share our love and to share our light and to try not to get involved in the mess that's going on, but to like, I don't listen to the news anymore. And so I just don't listen to the news, but I do read it. I read it on my phone when I get up in the morning, and that's that. But hopefully we can keep our energy moving upward and moving forward and moving in a positive direction. So that was sort of a general long-winded answer to that question, but I encourage you to check out this Melvin Morse book, and it's good. And if you can't find it, just email me and I'll be glad to send you the title.
But you would ask your guides and other side informants their thoughts on the matter. Is that right? I'm not trying to pin you up against a wall, but
what I just got is share love. That's what I just got.
But love is the common denominator, no doubt. That's irrefutable. But I would love to see some sage on the other side, or sages, that would say, this is part of the process, this is where you're at, and this is what's going to happen. I mean, one of the common thread stories is that someone is going to, rise up in this mess,
Mhm.
actually provide leadership, guidance, and win the respect of so many people, which of course is largely lost right now.
So David,
Yes.
you have the best name out there. I
know
encourage it to be
What it
you.
means? You know what it means in Hebrew?
What?
Beloved.
I encourage you to share your belovedness with our world.
Mm.
If we could all do that, it'd be a different world. And you could be our leader. It'd be awesome. And I love that smile.
I think Pete Buttigieg has a better shot at it than I do.
You think who what?
Pete Buttigieg has a
Oh,
better.
well, so now we're getting into politics. I'm not talking politics. I'm just talking love. And you have a beautiful soul.
I'm talking about a person that when he speaks is inspirational,
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
I agree.
well versed.
I agree. But so are you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I think you'd like Melvin's book, actually.
Yeah, I want to get that. That's I got all the hardbound copies of all the essays for that contest, but
Yeah.
it's heavy reading. And most of the arguments are about 70 pages long. It's
At least.
tough, but yeah. A couple questions. One, are you doing remote healing at the conference this year? Because I haven't been going in person, but I've been doing the remote, so I listen in on a lot of the talks. I was curious, since energetic healing can be done remotely, do you all do that from the conference?
We do not. And I do a lot of remote healing myself, but I just didn't want to get into that. And so this is in person healing. Maybe at some point we'll do it, but we haven't. And so we're not into that at the moment.
And my follow-up question, which I don't think anybody can answer, but I'm curious what you would say. What is this energy that everything's made of? We do a lot with the electromagnetic field in healing, or diagnostics, EKGs and everything, and acupuncture and everything, I think, is working with the electromagnetic field of the body. But what is the energy that makes up everything?
Well, I would love to be able to give you a very medical scientific answer, but I'm going to come back to the classic love. And you say, well, what is love? Like, what is that? But if we can absorb and assume love, it just transcends everything.
But I am fascinated by so many near-death experiences come back and say, I saw that love, which I always thought was an emotion, is actually the energy of which everything in creation is made.
Yeah.
But these vibrating strings of energy that the physicists talk about, they never quite use that word love, but it might as well be, because they don't know what it is either.
Agreed. Well, see, love comes from the heart, and a lot of the physicists are in the mind. And when we die, when we pass, when we transition, I believe that it's not the mind that continues, it's the heart. And so when we try to have a scientific, physical explanation, it is a challenge, because we're really dealing with energetic love.
With the energy that seems to be centered in the heart region of the body anyway. Yes.
Yeah. And then it goes all around. It goes all through us.
Mm-hmm.
It's really lovely. Lovely. It's lovely.
Energy healers. Other question. We've gone past our 8:30 mark, so you're kind to stick with us. Does anyone have any other questions or anything else Becky would like to share with us?
I'm excited to see what David Sobers does, because I could see you just moving forward in this realm and helping